Hey there! In this video, I'm making a tissue box cover. It's one of those fancy boxes that you put over the top of a box of tissues to weigh it down and to make it look less like a cardboard box of tissues. This one specifically is going to be Game of Thrones themed. Tissue boxes are pretty straightforward, basically just a box with an open bottom and an open slit at the top for the tissues to come out. To fancy this up a bit, I wanted to put a decorative border along the top and make it out of a second piece of wood so that would add some contrast and a little bit of depth. Since the bottom is open, we only need 5 sides. 4 of them will be the exact same size, and the one at the top will be a perfect square. So for the very top, we've got 2 borders. We've got the actual body of the box that has the open slit cut into it, and then we have a small square border that goes as the second layer. For the border around the top sides, we will have 4 narrow strips. It's important to remember that these strips should not all be the same length. If the strips were the exact same length, and they were the exact same length as the actual box itself, we'd just have these open notches at each corner. So 2 of the sides have to be longer. They've got to be a total of 6 millimeters longer, 3 for each end, since that's the thickness of the wood. Top panel with opening. 4 sides with sigils to be rastered. Top border and top side strips. Notice how 2 of the strips are longer. Laser cutters have 2 modes of operation, raster and vector. Raster is where the laser moves back and forth from left to right, left to right, left to right, down, like an inkjet printer. Laser turns on for black and off for white. On and off, that's it. So you really only get to do black and white images, no grayscales. You can do some tricks with dithering if you want to get fancy, but we're not doing that here. Rastering is the slowest thing you can do with a laser cutter because it is the max speed and it covers the whole space going at that consistent speed. The second mode is vector. Vector can be used to etch in drawn lines as well as cut drawn lines. It really just depends on how high the power setting you're using and how slow you tell the laser to move. Here, all of the vector lines I did are just cut lines, no etching. Once cutting is done, I sand the wood to get rid of the burn shadows and to make the wood smoother. The radial sander is one of the best purchases I made. It's so much faster than sanding by hand, and you can actually get them pretty cheap. First thing I did was stain the darker parts, which include the top border and the 4 top strips. I'm using a foam brush and I dab the stain into the etched bits so that it gets down into the design. When I just brush over it, you can see how the stain doesn't reach the details. You need to wipe away the stain afterwards or else it'll take forever to dry and it's going to be rough and oily and tacky. This is the first coat of polyurethane for the base wood panels. I dab the foam brush into the etched areas first. They're the most absorbent and it takes a bit more. Then I go over the rest of the surface. Poly doesn't have to be smooth here, it just has to get absorbed into the wood pores. No matter how careful you are, this stage won't get smooth and shiny finish. The wood is just too porous. You really do have to sand and poly it at least once more before you're going to get gloss. This is a day after staining the parts, so the stain has dried. This is the first coat of poly for the border bits. Now that the first coat of poly has dried on all of the pieces, I need to sand them. They're a little glossy, but the surface is very rough to the touch. Quick side lesson. Wood is an organic substance and it is very porous. Even after you've sanded it and it feels pretty smooth, it's still full of tiny pores. Polyurethane is basically liquid plastic. It fills in the pores of the wood and leaves this solid plastic coating. But the first coat is thin, so it's still rough. It's filling in these holes, but the tiny bumps and holes and things, they're still there, and it's really just kind of made this big bumpy top layer. When you sand that coating, you're not smoothing porous, you're smoothing plastic, and that actually sticks. This coating doesn't have any more holes to fill, or at least they're really small at this point. When you put another coat on top, if you put it on kind of thick, it's liquid, and there's surface tension plus gravity, it gets you this smooth surface. Let it dry like that and you get a really nice shine. If it's still not smooth and shiny after the second coat, another pass at sanding and a third coat will definitely get you shine. So now that we've got our first sanding pass, first poly pass, second sanding pass done, it's time for the second poly pass. This time, it's a lot more important to be slow and careful with the brush strokes. If you do a good enough job with this coat, you can avoid having to do a third coat altogether. When I've got rastered bits like these, I go in and gently fill in those areas with poly first, using the foam brush and sort of pressing it against the surface to squeeze the poly out. After all of the indents are filled, I will load up the brush and do smooth, steady strokes across the whole surface from one end to the other. If the wet surface is smooth and shiny and doesn't have a lot of bumps or dust speckles or bubbles, it'll dry that way and it'll end up super glossy. Once everything is dried and set, it is time to assemble. Tiny notches guarantee a sturdy hold, but they're also very tedious and a pain in the butt to get glue into. I use a toothpick. Gotta wipe off the excess glue. Rubber bands are your friend. You see how the top border is made so it's wider than the actual top panel? It extends about 3 millimeters beyond each side, which is the thickness of a single sheet of plywood. That means that this lip will cover the edges of the top border pieces. Yay for rubber bands! Finally, gluing on the top part. Lots of careful adjustments to make sure everything is lined up and flush before the glue sets. And here it is done! Complete with tissues. Stark and Targaryen, Lannister and Tyrell. Alas, I made this design about a year ago. I may need to replace the Tyrell rose with something else. Maybe the Greyjoy Kraken. Honestly, it could be any of the sigils. They're pretty easy to swap out for any future iterations of this that I may make. Anyways, that's it. I'm planning a future video where I go into some of the tips and tricks with Adobe Illustrator, including how image trace black and white images works, like these sigils, versus how to trace something manually when image trace isn't up to the task. Probably include some basic how-tos on vector lines, because they're kind of weird when you haven't gotten used to them yet. I'll try to get working on that soon. If there is anything in particular that anyone wants me to cover, let me know down in the comments. Anyways, hope you enjoyed this. If you did, give the video a like or a share or both, and that would be super spiffy, and I would totes appreciate it. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to be awesome.